So sometimes I need to be careful what I ask for, and I had the opportunity to reflect on a Lenten exploration of my humanity and the humanity of others a couple of weeks ago that I didn't expect. I was given the opportunity to kind of look head on at my humanity and those of others when I was invited to serve on a criminal jury trial 2 weeks ago. For a whole week, a felony case, an assault case. I was surprised by this because ministers don't get chosen for this kind of stuff. The conventional wisdom among my colleagues is that you shouldn't worry when you get a summons in the mail. They never call us, like lawyers or police officers. They think, so I thought, that we already come in convinced of our moral code, we don't have a very open mind, and that when we get into the room, we're going to try and take over the conversation, use our powers of persuasion, take over the room, and talk a lot, as if that would ever happen. And lo and behold, after the extremely honest answers that I gave them about my family experience with violence, my feelings on the justice system, my political leanings, and my job as a Unitarian minister, lo and behold, I still got chosen. And I was shocked to find out that within just a few minutes, everybody involved started making claims, explicit claims, about human nature. I was preparing to preach this sermon, and so my ears were perking up. The judge immediately said, "It is human nature for you who are staring at this defendant, looking back at you, to immediately have a prejudgment in your mind where your question is, what did he do? Instead of the question he wanted us to ask, what has he been accused of?" The judge pointed out that that's a subtle but important difference, and that it was our natural predisposition, built into the fabric of what it meant to be a human, to have that judgment. The defense attorneys and the prosecutors also made explicit claims about what it meant to be a human and how that related to their case. They told me that it was human nature to maybe give inconsistent testimony after a traumatic event. That it was human nature for me not to be able to forget a piece of evidence that was stricken from the record after an objection. That it was human nature for me to carry in my bias and prejudice, the inherent racism that is in so much of our system and culture and in me. They were very explicit, more so than I thought about that. And they asked us, this is not the time to feel good about yourself by telling us you don't have bias. This is the time to tell us exactly which biases you have. So we went through the trial, and all of a sudden, it became clear to me that I was not in an abstract environment anymore. I read a lot of books about the justice system. I have preached sermons about the spiritual complications around our justice system, unfairly incarcerating more young black men than any other population. I have gone to seminars and anti-racism workshops. I have preached sermons on redemption and grace and forgiveness and human nature, and none of that mattered now. I was scheduled to be in an event that I missed from an author who was talking about how we could reform the justice system to not disproportionately incarcerate young black men. And instead, I was on a jury where I was going to make a decision about whether or not to incarcerate a young black man. I felt the weight of the responsibility and of my limitations so strongly. All of a sudden, my capacity to screw up was highlighted. You can ask my wife that I don't always listen like people would want. That sometimes I remember details of a conversation that somebody else didn't. That I have selective hearing, that my memory tends to favor my interpretation of events. This is who I am. And I worried that I was going to make a big mistake. I worried that my capacity for prejudice or my desire to be somewhere else, my selective hearing, my memory that serves me sometimes and doesn't, would lead to a guilty person being set free while a victim had to suffer the trauma of knowing that, or an innocent person being in jail for a long, long time and we were in charge of the sentencing, or a whole host of other mistakes that we could make. I didn't sleep well. I got up in the middle of the night and paced the halls in my house. I dreamed about the case over and over because suddenly there was this conflict. We were being told to trust in the goodness of the system filled with human beings who were capable of hearing evidence and making rational decisions. You are good, go for it. And at the same time, all of us in the room knew we could make a terrible mistake. I felt really conflicted about whether I could trust my humanity or not. And that feels natural to me because I think that we have inherited conflicting stories in the West about what it means to wear a human body. I think we have inherited this kind of dual notion, this sometimes understanding that we are good and special and terrible, all at the same time. We hear that all the time. And I think we inherited that primarily from religion, this conflicting story. Some of you maybe haven't read Genesis 1 and 2 lately. But I would encourage you to go back and do it. They're super short and easy to read. Second, a lot of what you think you remember from those books is not true. We made decisions about what we thought of those books a long time ago, maybe haven't picked them up again. But especially because they have influenced our understanding of what it means to be a human being in the West so profoundly that we're like fish swimming in water. I don't think we even see it. Our art, our poetry, theater, religion, philosophy, psychology, our understanding of family systems, the checks and balances that were put in place when this very country was founded, and the moral arguments that were used about humanity are all influenced by a few pages in the Bible. And interestingly enough, there are few pages that tell two different stories. They're written by two different authors. We know in biblical scholarship that what we call the first 5 books of the Hebrew Scriptures were written and compiled by at least 4 or 5 different authors. That's for a different class or sermon. Just trust me today. But 1 and 2 are written by different people, mostly guys. In Genesis 1, we get this story of creation out of nothing. It looks a lot like evolution in some ways. Creation starts from nothing with a nameless God who separates the light from the dark, no matter from matter. There's a spinning globe that now has water and mountains, and then more complex life, fish and animals. And then at the very end, us. At each stage, you know this part, at the end of the day, God declares it good. But at the very last day, when God looks at us, God says it is very good. In fact, so good that that author's version of the story says that we were made in God's image. Plural gods. The Hebrew word is more than one God. If you go back and read it, it says, let us make them in our image. Let us make them. It's talking about many gods. The pinnacle of creation in our image, very good. And then you turn the page, and you get a totally different story. The person who wrote Genesis 2, called the Yahwist, tells a more earthy story. It's the one with snakes and nakedness, being expelled from a garden, not being able to control what you eat and what you don't eat. That God in that story has a name, Yahweh. That God has arms and legs and walks through the garden in the cool of the day. It says, where are you? Hello, I can't find you. And it's a story that we think is about two people named Adam and Eve, but it's not at all. Those are not names. The Hebrew is a pun that we don't get when we read the story in English. The word Adam isn't a name given to a creature, it's the name for person or man, but it's also a pun. It comes from the word Adama, which means dirt. It's the red clay of the Tigris and Euphrates. It's the same word. So the most literal translation would be, and then God picked up some dirt and made a dirt thing and breathed into that dirt thing's nostrils, took out its rib when it was sleeping and made its partner Eve, which is the Hebrew word for source of life, or living one. So if we read the story in its literal translation, it is Yahweh picked up some dirt and made dirt thing. It took dirt thing's rib and made giver of life, source of life, living one with it, and they had trouble. Immediately, they eat what they're not supposed to eat. They start meditating on why they have to die. This is the passage from dust you are, and to dust you shall return. The author gives us his explanation of why a human woman's childbirth is so painful, why we have to work and find meaningful work. Within a few pages, these two people are ashamed of their nakedness and body image, have trouble figuring out how to be faithful in relationship with each other and with God. One of their children murders the other one. This person has said, it's hard to be a person. It's hard to be dirt thing and life bearer. And we make serious mistakes. Like that 5-year-old. And that's why I sometimes think it's hard to be a person. The people who edited those books together seemed to get that they needed both sides of the story. Whoever put those stories into one, because they weren't written together, said, hey, include the one about how great we are, and also how bad we are, and put those together, because that seems more accurate. Our mistake and our self-righteousness is in thinking that the ancients wrote literal stories that now we interpret metaphorically, when it is true that they wrote metaphors that we are silly enough to interpret literally and think they were stupid. They knew what they were doing. You don't call a story earth thing and life bearer if you think that it's about two humans who messed up and now we're all sinful. They were just trying to reflect on why it's so hard to be a person. When I look as a human being into the world, I do ask those same questions. Why is it hard to be a person? If a dog could email, would it stay up all night fretting about what it had said? Do other animals worry about their sex life or their body image? Do they struggle with how to control their appetite? Are they unfaithful to their partners? Do they lie? Do they struggle with finding meaningful work or conceiving and bearing children? Is there something uniquely hard about being a person? Evolutionary psychologists say the answer is yes. They call it evolutionary mismatch. The idea is basically that our bodies and our genes evolved over millions of years in a form that suited cave people very well. But the environment around them changed so fast with agriculture and technology and civilization that basically we have the same genes, but now we have Cheetos and the internet. And so our predisposition to like sugar, fat, and salt, to seek out multiple partners, to be predisposed to acts of violent rage, and to be anxious about tigers. Tigers? Yeah. Now, it leads us, instead of having our hearts have heart attacks about tigers, we stay up all night fretting about our boss's email. We have trouble remaining faithful to our partners or controlling our appetites, acting out in rage, and worrying about what other people think about us. Maybe it is just hard to be a person. Our Unitarian ancestors took a radical turn from the people who said we were depraved. In the 1800s, they said, we are not depraved, we're not going to hell. In fact, we're not just good, we're very good. And we're not just very good, thank you very much, we are divine. They said we were not born evil, we were born holy. The image of God is reflected in us. In fact, they said that we knew God was in us because we're smart. And they said getting smarter would help all of our problems. They were wrong about that. People like Ralph Waldo Emerson said, do you know why Jesus was important? Not because he was the Son of God, but because he knew he was a child of God. And if you knew you were a child of God, you would be just like him. You would be a prophet. They used to hang this thing up in Unitarian churches on the wall in the 1800s that said, and forgive my kind of ancient patriarchal language, I'm just quoting them. It said, we believe in the fatherhood of God, the brotherhood of man, the leadership of Jesus, salvation by character, and the progress of mankind onward and upward forever. Salvation by character, we get better by getting better. And the progress of mankind onward and upward forever. They've been reading their Darwin. He was a Unitarian, by the way. And they imagined that there was what was called the perfectibility of the human spirit. We would just keep getting better. And they preached that idea, and they loved that idea, and then we had world wars and dictators in the 20th century. And conservatives of all religious stripes said to us, what about that onward and upward forever business? So now we're kind of stuck in the complexity of it. Maybe, as Maya Angelou said, we don't have to choose between being sinners or divines. In her language, you can kind of hear that sense of insignificance. Are we just floating on this rock through space? And I think that if I were to be on a star looking back at us from a billion light years away, it wouldn't make any sense at all to even use the words bad or good to describe us. In that sense, I don't think it matters. But once you are on this rock, you matter a lot. You have an extreme impact on the people around you. Your home, your classroom, your family, your children, your partners and parents in this church, in the city, in the world will never be the same because you have walked among us. I walked away from that jury trial more optimistic about our humanity. Actually, more optimistic about the justice system. I didn't expect that. I walked away seeing that just like Maya Angelou said, we have hands that are capable of acting out in violence. And we have hands that are capable of holding one another in love. I saw that we are capable of selfishness and greed, and I also watched as 12 strangers cared deeply about the fate of people they would never see again. We worried about our abilities to make the right choice, and we fretted knowing that our decisions would impact someone for the rest of their lives. And I watched people of every political and religious variety, with thoughtfulness and dedication and love, approach other human beings with grace and confidence. And I would be happy to be tried by that group of other 11 people. It only happened once we understood that we had power. And we do, but we just don't remember it. We had the advantage of someone standing up and saying, you are going to have an impact on somebody else's life. And it's going to happen today. But that's the case for all of us. I hope that this church helps remind you that you can't help but have an impact on other people's lives. I hope that this church reminds you that you are not alone in your struggle. If you struggle with what to eat in your body image and conceiving and bearing children and finding meaningful work and faithfulness in relationships, well, that's just being a person. There's nothing wrong with you for having those struggles. And yet I hope that this church helps you remember that you bear the responsibility of bringing the very real impact that your life has to every encounter that you come across. Be humble, for you are made of dirt. Be proud, for you are made of stars. May you remember this each day of your life. Amen.